Welcome to the Hay Kings podcast, brought to you by Crone, dedicated to hay and forage producers. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Dr. Carson Roberts. He's an assistant professor and state extension specialist for forage agronomy at the University of Missouri. Dr. Roberts holds a PhD in plant and soil science from Mississippi State, and he leads the applied research program on forage and livestock systems to support one of the largest beef herds in the U.S. He wrote an article that stirred some controversy recently, and
ruffled feathers.
he got the full force of social media dropped upon him. Well, welcome to the podcast first.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've been a long-time listener, and so glad to be on and join you for this interesting conversation.
You're from Idaho, and you're no stranger to agriculture.
Yeah, well, I certainly hope not. I grew up in the Preston, Idaho area. If you're familiar with that area, it's in the Cache Valley, which is on the basically half the valley is in Utah, half the valley is in Idaho. Oftentimes, it's called the Little Switzerland of the Rockies because there have been a lot of creameries that have kept going during corporate consolidation and all that. So a lot of small dairies have stayed in that area because they've been supported by those local creameries. Both of my grandparents were dairymen through the 80s and 90s, and they both sold out when things got a little tougher. Basically grew up on the farm where my mother grew up. My grandpa ran that farm, and I helped out with that a lot. He grew alfalfa and barley.
Now that'd be brewing barley, right?
No, that's feed barley in that area. Feed barley, and he sold to some of the local dairies in the area. If you get up more north in the state, then you'll start running it. Really, not too far more north in the state, you'll get into the brewing barley more. He never let go of the small bales. So he was making small bales, which was really a great niche market for him, 2 hours away from Salt Lake City. And so he had a pretty good market for horse hay. And we also had a beef finishing herd where the horse people, they're pretty picky. And so, they'd throw out a bale that looked kind of funny. And so he'd feed all that quality hay, to beef finishers plus the barley. Basically, he took some of his barley and he'd have it rolled, and he'd finish out a bunch of cows off of basically the waste from the horse industry. And so, and then he would sell that beef to the people who are buying his hay. So kind of a pretty decent little
cross sales.
Exactly. And my dad, he ran a herd of beef cattle, production grade beef cattle on his father's farm for a number of years. And so I got to see that side of things. During high school, I milked cows pretty much all through high school for a local dairy.
This is why we're going to be friends. I have a similar background.
In conjunction with all the stuff that we were all side roll, wheel pipe, right. Wheel lines. Yeah, and people other places call them side roll. Right. I found out. So they don't understand what wheel line means. Did that, baled a ton of hay during high school and even into college. And then, I went off to college. I went to BYU, Idaho there in Rexburg, and I milked cows all through college to pay for college. Kind of stuck with that production ag, dealing with all of that. Currently here in Missouri, when I moved here, we purchased a small farm, 50 acres, and we have a few cattle and horses and stuff like that.
Let's get into the controversy, because of course the headline that came across that got posted to Hay Kings, and it's on Drovers, so this is legit.
Right.
10 reasons you should quit making hay. And of course, when it got posted to Hay Kings, the full force of social media came bearing down upon you with 142 comments, 70 likes. It's not that everybody completely hates and disagrees with you. There's 47 laughing reactions, 2 shocked faces and 1 angry face. So maybe the reaction wasn't quite as bad, but the comments were pretty rough.
Yeah, and there were a few. I don't know. There were a few favorable comments there too, but it was pretty funny, comical, really. I sent a few comments about how I needed a belt whipping to my dad so that he could be sure to come out and give me my fair share. So
right.
Anyway.
I mean, I just want to read a couple of these and not to put you down at all, but rather just to demonstrate how passionate people are about this particular topic. It's pretty obvious that some of the people that write these articles don't actually farm. Well, we just covered that you know what you're talking about. You should all quit baling hay. P.S. My ads are on Marketplace when you want to buy. I think that comment there really deals with the fact that there are definitely times and places where you have to feed hay. Here's one very good read down here in South Texas. If I don't bale my own hay, I do not have hay to feed my cows. We are in a constant drought. So, again, another point of discussion about when you have to have hay. And why it might be all right to make hay. This is Mark saying, anybody that listens to that, have fun. Ruben says, sounds like the article was written. Well, he actually said, sounds like the article was wrote by a pencil pusher. Oop, yeah, we're not going to read that one. Travis, go ahead. Travis says, go ahead and sell your hay equipment. I'll have plenty of premium hay for sale. Steve, I wonder who paid for this study. There was no study here. This was just points of discussion, right?
Right. Yeah. And well, there were some of this information that I would have picked up from some studies. So.
Oh, sure. Oh, Jacob. And Jacob writes, it would be awesome to just graze 365 days a year, but sometimes drought and hard winters happen. Again, going back to there really are times and places. Andrew Limegruber, he's actually been on the podcast. I'm going to throw him under the bus. I couldn't agree more. Cattle guys and dairies, stop making hay and give me a call.
Yeah. So on that line, I'd like to talk about that a little bit because I kind of agree with that logic in a sense that a lot of these smaller beef guys, because I wrote this article for beef producers in Missouri.
Not the whole country, right?
Yeah, and there are a lot of those guys that would benefit from partnering with somebody who knows how to make good quality hay.
Oh,
because there are guys that are really good beef producers.
Yep.
And there are guys that are really good at making hay.
And they're not always the same.
And not always, yeah, exactly. They're not always the same person. And a lot of beef guys aren't really good at, let's say, mechanic work. And so mechanic work and hay kind of go together a lot of times.
Yep.
And so I think that's one thing where I totally get behind that. And for you guys that do make hay every year, yeah, listen up, because this is an opportunity for you to market to your neighbors and say, look, I can make you a better product. Yep. I can make it for cheaper than what you could do it on your own.
Yep.
Let me take that stress off of you so that you can keep doing what you do best.
The all-new Krone Gen 5 Big Pack Large Square Baler gives you outstanding reliability and serviceability. The completely updated VFS makes serviceability easier, faster, and more economical. Talk with your local dealer to learn more about Krone machines built for generations.
To your point, I'm going to pick on some of my Seattle neighbors, and I'm sure they don't listen to the podcast, so if I offend them, good. They moved from Seattle, bought a half a dozen Highland cows and 100 acres to go along with it, and then bought $60,000 worth of haying equipment for 6 cows. And even if it's 12 cows or 100, maybe 100 cows is a different story.
Or $10,000 worth of haying equipment. It's still kind of insane. Yeah. Now, of course, their argument was this equipment is going to last for many, many, many years. But if you do the math on that and you divide by... They'll never be able to outrun the depreciation on that equipment.
Never. I mean, even if you just use... Let's stretch it out. and say that they went to a 10-year depreciation, which is not really realistic. Like IRS only lets you go to 7, right? You take that 60,000 divided by 10, that's $6,000 a year in equipment expense for 6 cows in this case. That's $1,000 a head in feed cost. And that doesn't include the land cost. That doesn't include, they don't use fertilizer or herbicides because they don't believe in that. It'll never pay. It will never, ever, ever pay. And no. Now I see that they're buying hay too. So not only do they have the expense of the equipment, but they're buying hay on top of that because they're not fertilizing and they're not spraying and they're not like, if we're talking about making
good agronomic practices. Yeah.
Correct. They're not using good agronomic practices. So, and then we've had 4 years of drought in a row where maybe they produce 10 tons of hay. So they have $6,000 in equipment costs on 10 tons of hay.
Oh no.
Yeah. Like
that's one of,
it's so bad. That's a very extreme example. And
right.
They both have off-farm jobs and like they're financially fine, but those aren't good economic decisions. And that's just a very extreme example of what you're talking about, right?
Right. If you look at the average number of cattle per beef farm, let's say in just Missouri.
Yeah.
And Missouri has 3 million cows or so, give or take, depending on.
That's a bunch.
Yeah. But the average herd size is 45 cows.
Right.
And so even if you're buying old used equipment,
yep,
it's really hard to stretch all those depreciation dollars across those 50 to 100 cows.
Right.
Especially when there's some cheaper options, and we can get into that.
Right.
Including part of that equation, including buying hay from your neighbor. So
Right. Let's go through, we just touched on the big concept here. Economies focus on different things because of different production constraints and different cost structures and relative cost structures versus absolute cost structures. The concept here is that if you're really, really good at growing beef cows, really, really good at that thing, you should actually spend all of your time on that thing and not divide your time producing a hay product and let your neighbor who's really, really good at hay grow the hay. And then you trade back and forth and everybody makes more money. It's a better economy because of that specialization.
Yeah, exactly. I think that oftentimes, especially in today's society, we're always trying to, I guess, do it all ourselves. But,
right.
Once we become part of a community, really honestly, when we get part of that community, everyone's profits go up. It almost always happens.
Yep.
If you look at the Amish, they don't do everything exactly agronomically correct, but they're always making money because they have this community thing going on. So
yep.
Yeah, whenever you make friends with your neighbor, maybe you don't agree politically or whatever, but make friends with your neighbor because both of you will benefit from that relationship.
Right. Okay. So let's go through the 10 things that you listed out here. Keep diving into but we have the big idea that specialization is good. You might be giving up, another $10,000 in beef production to raise $5,000 worth of hay. That's the big concept here. And for hay producers, It's the same. You might be crummy at raising beef cows, but really good at making hay. You might be giving up $10,000 in hay production to raise $5,000 worth of calves.
Right.
$5,000
there's a statistic
calf.
There's a statistic out there that because there's a fair number of farms that are diversified, they would call them, where they have both cattle and row crops or something like that.
Right.
It's almost always the case that they are failing at one of those business enterprises. They're either really successful on the cow side, or they're really successful on the row crop side. But there's almost no middle ground where they're making money at both. And this is not a year-to-year basis thing. This is in general across the board. Usually one enterprise is making more,
right,
even in downsides than the other one.
So let's go through your list of things here. Skyrocketing equipment costs. And you go on to say here that it used to take equipment and machinery inflation has outpaced cattle inflation by a ratio of 10 to 1 in the last 50 years. In the 70s, it only took 14 500-pound calves to purchase a new round baler. Today, it takes 41 of those same calves to buy a round baler. That just says that speaks to barriers to entry, right? Now, if you want to go buy some old junky hay equipment that you're always busting your knuckles on, well, then you're giving up $10,000 worth of calf production to go bust your knuckles turning wrenches. That doesn't necessarily make sense. So reason number 1 checks out.
Think about this one just for a second. In the 1970s, the 1970 model round baler didn't have nearly the capabilities of a brand new baler today. Take Vermeer, whoever, John Deere, whoever has a baler. You can make more acres of hay with today's balers than you could with the old ones.
Right.
And so there's some economies of scale to this. Also, the problem is that farm sizes haven't gotten any bigger for a lot of guys. They've owned the same farm for the past 50 years. Anyway, you're bringing a more expensive baler onto a farm that's the same size as it used to be 50 years ago. So that's kind of one of the issues at play here.
Yeah.
Another one, if you think about, there are a number of things that you're exporting with hay. And oftentimes I see in America, one of the things that we are exporting with our hay is our abilities to be mechanics. That would be true for all of these people who like to run, old used equipment.
Oh, yeah.
You're basically exporting your ability to do mechanic work, and you're selling that as a hay product. Yep. On a global scale, we're selling hay to Saudi Arabia, and we're exporting water. That's our export to Saudi Arabia.
Right.
When we sell hay to Japan, we're exporting land because that's our advantage over them. That's why they're bringing in the hay. Yeah. So there's always kind of this export economy. What are you selling? And
this is what I was touching on earlier, that idea of comparative advantage. Not what's your absolute advantage, but what are you comparatively better at? And the U.S. has excess water, excess land, excess roads, excess port infrastructure, all of those things. That's actually what we're exporting. That's our comparative advantage. Exactly. Yeah. And whether we're
not exporting hay, we're exporting those things that are of value that others don't have. Yeah.
And in this case, our mechanical abilities are also being exported. And that could be an export just off of the farm to the next farm, right?
Exactly. So, but recognize that and look at yourself and say, can I make more money? Can I make more money being the mechanic for myself and selling the hay as the export? Yep. Or, one thing my brother's a tractor mechanic, and he used to run a custom hay operation, but he has found he can make more money by spending his time fixing other people's junk than he can doing it himself and trying to make hay out of it. That's something that he did. He's selling his labor to wealthy ranchers in Wyoming and making good money at it. So.
Sure.
No other square baler has a bigger appetite for the most demanding conditions than Krone HDP2 Big Pack. 8 knotters put more hay on every bale, and a new V-knotter design makes hanging on the bell hook almost impossible, requires fewer adjustments, and leaves no scraps behind. See it all at krone-na.com. Krone machines, built for generations.
I have a farmer that I do some consulting work with, and he was talking about this exact issue. He has a bale wagon that's busted. The roller rack has all sorts of cracks and breaks in it. I said, Shane's hay equipment repair shop is open for business. And the suggestion there was, hey, Shane, you're actually pretty good at fixing things, but why don't you just start fixing things? He's had a heck of a hay season. His swather header came apart in 6 different ways, and he's been doing nothing but fixing things. He's pretty good at it. And out of that adversity comes opportunity. Those are really important things to consider. What's your next best option? Point 2, over-equipped farms. A farm size should reflect the amount of equipment owned. Nearly all the farms again, this was all focused on Missouri. All the farms in Missouri with fewer than 400 cows would be more profitable if they simply sold the haying equipment and bought hay. Take me through that.
Yeah, so start writing down all of the pieces of equipment that you have that you wouldn't have if you didn't make hay. Okay.
This is the idea of a partial budget.
Yeah, exactly. And all of those pieces of equipment that the majority of their job is for making hay, and you could do with less of a piece of equipment, lower horsepower or whatever if you didn't. Really, what happens, let's say in Missouri, but this is very common across the country, especially with smaller producers. We have a tractor that we use we use it to bale. But then we say, oh, well, it'd be really nice to have a smaller tractor that we could use to rake. And so we purchased one of those. And then it'd be really nice if we had a loader tractor that we could use, to load the bales with. And then we have a bale wagon or two and a pickup truck to go along with that. And all of a sudden, a smaller farm, less than 400 cows. And, the reason why I picked this number is because 400 cow herd, if you're feeding them, let's say, 2,400 pounds of forage during the wintertime per cow, that's 240 acres of hay in Missouri. Anything lower than that, all of those equipments, when you spread those out across that few of acres, then it doesn't make much sense because you're dealing with some pretty expensive equipment now. So, yeah, that's what I try to get at that point. A lot of guys, there's some that have figured it out, but a lot of people just purchase too much equipment for their enterprise. It's very common, especially among the smaller producers. I mean, if you're a smaller producer, let's say less than 400 cows, I mean, gosh, you might could get away with one tractor, to get all your work done, and maybe not the fanciest baler on the market and stuff like that.
Right. Haying takes time. Your most valuable resource is time. Robert says, now I'm reading here, Robert says he's seen too many producers spending their day doing $15 an hour work making hay while they should be doing $30 to $100 an hour work like marketing, education, finance, improving efficiencies, and improving pasture.
Yeah.
How are you spending your time? What's the next best option with your time?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, could you be on the phone, with that time, making a deal with a backgrounder or somebody, to sell your animals at a higher margin? You could be dealing with your feed supplier, tracing down quotes, finding a feed for less. That's a big one. I mean, you could spend $100 or an hour on that and make $100 or save $100, which is basically the same thing in business. So there's all of these things, improving pasture efficiency. Could you be building more fence to take in some of that land that you haven't really been able to access with grazing for your animals? Could you be chopping down some trees to open up pasture, stuff like that? There's a lot of these things, that you could be doing with that time. Educational opportunities. You could be going to some type of an educational opportunity where you could learn a new skill that could help your profitability of your business. Maybe you could learn to artificially inseminate, but you couldn't because you were too busy making hay. Or you could go to a grazing school and learn how to be more effective at grazing your animals, stuff like that. As a cow producer, a lot of those things could make you a lot more money than just sitting on the tractor.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, point 4, variable forage quality. How often does the hay crop get rained on? How often does harvest get delayed? And reducing forage quality, boy, that's a thing this year. With purchased hay, you can use a test to have complete control over forage quality. You can have 100% control of the quality of the hay that you purchase. You cannot always control the quality that you make. I mean, this is the make versus buy conundrum. Sometimes it's not always like the quality that you need isn't always there on the market. Again, that's a problem for this year. One of the comments was clearly from a dairy farmer saying, if I had to buy all of the hay that I need for my dairy farm, it would be too expensive, right?
Yeah. In the West, it's really easy to find good quality hay, usually. In the East, it's not so easy. Again, this is where I recommend finding is somebody who's really good at making hay. I think of a guy in my state that's really good at making hay and a very common guest on the podcast, Jeff Jackson. You know, he makes really good hay. He knows what it takes and he does a really good job at it. Find people who understand haymaking like that and purchase from those people. Oftentimes you can always get great hay that way. And oftentimes you can get it for less expensive than what you're trying to make it for. This is a big issue in the fescue belt because we make a ton of really low quality hay, and I don't really understand it too much, but a lot of folks will wait till the 4th of July to start rolling up their fescue hay. And at that point, we're, bouncing around at 8 to 9% crude protein and 50 to 52% TDN, which is like bare minimum what you can feed a brood cow. We're basically feeding them straw. And then in a year like this one, where we've had so many variable rains, and I've talked to a few producers already this year that they knocked down some hay mid-July and they still haven't been able to get into the field to pick it up.
Oh, brutal.
Yeah, that at this point it's like, no, it's not even worth picking up. Just let it rot into the ground because it would, there's nothing there, and we've kind of been saturated at as far as the market goes for hay.
Yep.
That's one to pay attention to. And so for a haying operation, this is where you can add a lot of value. Think about drought. And I like to watch what drought is doing because it's really fun. From a scientist, I've done a lot of work. Yeah, I guess intriguing. From a scientist's perspective, I've done a lot of work with drought, and I'm always really excited when it doesn't rain because then a lot of my treatments actually express what they were trying to do. Right. So agronomically, it's kind of a fun time for me because I can be like, oh, look, here's what happens when you do this during a drought, when nutrients are there, whatnot, what you can actually succeed at during a drought. Right. That aside, when there's a couple different markets, the market that we're in now where hay is cheap, it pays to have quality because there's not a lot of it. And so when hay is cheap, produce quality hay. When hay is expensive, make as much hay as humanly possible. That's kind of, as a person who's producing hay, that's where you should be. You should always have your finger on the pulse of the market and really trying to understand when to produce quantity, when to produce quality. Because it varies depending on the year.
I really want to put an emphasis on this because in grain markets, that's not a thing.
Right.
Corn, wheat, soybeans, barley, well, maybe a little bit on barley, but there's no quality differentiation or very little quality differentiation in grain. Now, we can argue some of the end users do have quality specifications, but the way that those things are achieved is by blending very minute differences in quality. Hay, you can go from $400 a ton to $100 a ton in a rainstorm, and we just don't have that in the grain world, that magnitude of quality difference. So really understanding those differences and how to work through those challenges in a wet year or a dry year is really critical to being a good hay producer.
Right. Yeah. And when I was doing my master's work at Utah State, I did my master's work on companion crops with alfalfa, basically planting oats. We did a bunch of seeding rate work to see how many pounds of oats you should plant with alfalfa. Yep. Really fun. It'd be a great conversation. I did a lot of work.
A separate podcast, sure.
Yeah, totally. I could spend a couple hours talking about that.
We'll do it. The answer is yes.
that we found is that the end question was, should we plant a companion crop or should we just solo seed alfalfa and do a good herbicide management program? The answer to that question was, it really just depends, because during the study we had one year that was really, we had a really good rain year, and yields across the board on most crops were amazing. Hay prices were low. The next year it was the complete opposite. It was everything was all dry and brown by the first day in June, and there wasn't a lot of quantity around. And what we found through our research and through, looking at the economics of it is that there was a difference. During that wet year, it was more economical to produce a alfalfa crop without the companion crop because the quality was higher, and quality is what paid. And then the next year during the drought, it was more economical to plant the oats with the alfalfa because the quantity was higher, and quantity is what paid at that point.
I just want to point that there's one more step in that continuum. If you're dryland hay and there is zero rain, companion crops steal your moisture on establishment for alfalfa, and it doesn't work good. Zero rain is a whole different world.
Yeah.
That I'm living
right,
in.
And there's some things that I could get into on that, because we did all of this research was we had a continuum from dryland hay all the way to full over irrigation.
We're gonna have this conversation because I have some real opinions about the zero rain condition.
Known for greater throughput even in the heaviest crops, Krone Big Packs are the world's fastest large balers. With proven bale quality and increased density over other brands, Krone Big Pack balers are the right choice for optimized productivity. Talk with your local dealer to learn more about Krone machines, built for generations.
All right, let's go on. Earlier we talked about exporting skill sets or infrastructure, but haying also removes nutrients. So there's actually an app, Ag PhD, FERT removal. And these are just general guidelines. Plants remove nutrients at all sorts of different rates depending on growing conditions. But just in general, we can go into alfalfa and put 1 ton to the acre. Now, I'm going to talk about alfalfa, but there's also grass in here. Alfalfa is going to remove 12 pounds of phosphate, 49 pounds of potassium, 5 pounds of sulfur, magnesium, calcium, 18 pounds of calcium per acre, copper, manganese, zinc, boron, iron.
Does it have nitrogen in there too?
Oh, yeah. 51 pounds per ton. Yeah. Alfalfa doesn't produce enough to do a 4-ton crop. Okay. This app is really good. It has Bermuda grass, bluegrass. I'm just picking through. I mean, it has tons and tons of crops, lentils, lettuce, all sorts of stuff. But it does have millet grain, millet straw, rye.
There's corn stalks on there as well, I hope.
Oh, yes. Yes. Corn stover. Yep.
Yeah.
If 1 ton of corn stover, 16 pounds of nitrogen, 40 pounds of potassium, sulfur, manganese, calcium, all down the list, right?
Yeah.
But what I'm looking for, 1 ton of fescue removes 37 pounds of nitrogen, 12 pounds of phosphate, 54 pounds of potassium, and 5 pounds of sulfur.
Yeah. Okay. So I was a little conservative with my numbers here, but still.
Oh, you're close though.
Yeah.
You're
pretty close. I basically what I did there is I took, because I have a forage testing lab, and so I just took all of my data, fescue, and I just averaged it out and figured out what was in there.
So it like I said, whether you use the Ag PhD or the Ag PhD app, or your numbers, the concept here is the same. Those nutrients have a monetary value. Just remember that in the spring you buy fertilizer. That's the monetary value associated with it.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're on the beef side and you're purchasing hay, there's some added value in there. You could bring that hay onto your farm and feed it to your cows and not produce hay, and you're getting this fertilizer value that you wouldn't have gotten had you made the hay yourself.
Now, the nitrogen does cycle, so you don't necessarily get the nitrogen. You don't get to keep that nitrogen.
Sure, well, you keep some of it.
You do keep some of it, but the phosphorus and potassium and sulfur and all those minerals, they don't go anywhere.
Right.
In fact, it's a problem.
Well, sulfur will be quite mobile, but
right. But I mean, one of the problems we have in agronomics is phosphorus and potassium don't move.
yeah.
So like that's an important concept. You're actually building a stockpile of phosphorus and potassium anywhere that you're feeding hay.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the things that you need to consider. And what I found is that folks, including my dad, he was real bad at this. He would never fertilize anything.
Oh,
no. And so every year your yields are going down and down and down. And he's always like, well, this has been a rough year. Hopefully next year, when I was a kid, it rained all the time and it was better. Anyway, that was kind of the logic there.
Sounds like me right now.
But it's like, put a little fertilizer on that because you're missing out. But yeah, that's another cost that you need to account for when you're producing a hay crop. You can't just let that one slide. The big reasons why at a research station, why we can produce so much more yield in our variety trials and stuff than on-farm producers is because they're not meeting the full nutrient requirement. There's a few other things, but that's one of them. Yeah.
Right. And your analysis here suggests that this year it was about $72 a ton on fescue hay in just fertilizer value in the hay.
Yeah.
So if you're getting, I'm going to step away from my West Coast and say rolls of hay for $30 and they're about 1,000 pounds, all you're actually paying for there is the nutrients.
Yeah.
That's it. You're not paying for the operator's time, the equipment, the land, the fuel, the kids' college fund. You're not paying for any of that. That farmer is just giving you nutrients. You're just buying fertilizer.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of funny to me, scrolling the Facebook marketplace this morning and seeing all of the hay that's going for $20 to $50 a bale.
Oh yeah.
And I'm, oh man, and I saw quite a few posts on there that had old hay. And old hay is it's a wild card.
Yeah.
But for free.
And there's a time value of money component to that. Somebody was paying interest or giving up interest in income to have that hay sit in inventory.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I would continue to hold that inventory before I gave it away because again, the phosphorus and potassium don't go anywhere. They don't degrade. They don't evaporate. It doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
And there is a drought coming at some point.
Yeah. And so, I mean, gosh, if you're never going to own cattle or something, I mean, call your neighbor up and say, hey, come feed hay on my land with my hay or something like that, and it's to get rid of it so that all of that nutrients, or spread it out, put it, spread it across the landscape, something, because there's value in it.
Which comes to our next point about alternatives, profitable alternatives. If you didn't make hay, what else could you do? And in the example we just gave, instead of giving away hay, why don't you offer to feed somebody's cows for free? You're actually better off keeping those nutrients on your own farm.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating concept, right? But from the livestock producer's side, custom grazing, stockers, or adding value to home-raised cattle by grazing excess springtime forage, often that'll pay more than putting up hay.
Yeah, and this is an interesting one. There's a whole gob of research that has been done in Missouri on this topic on the stocker side from the animal science folks. Again, going back to these people who are really good at making cows, really good at producing beef, and I love beef. Look at what you could be doing with that hay ground. Think about the springtime. Springtime is when forage is the cheapest because of water, because of precipitation. And think about how you could take advantage of that cheap, high-quality forage, and oftentimes you can put that forage through an animal because an animal is just a forage harvester in and of itself. From an agronomist standpoint, that's how I look at a cow. A cow is just out there capturing the value of the forage through her rumen. That's all she is. The stocker enterprise, and especially like in years like this where the hay markets are not the hay, where the cattle markets are so good and the value of gain is so high right now. Yeah, you can do some custom grazing. You could do a stocker enterprise and make a lot more money than if you were to put up a hay crop. And this could be this. I would argue that this is probably true even in a drought, that you could probably do this and make more money and then buy in some hay.
Labor shortages. It's hard to find good help nowadays. And when you do find it, it's super expensive. Most hardworking young people are interested in making money, and they'd be expected to be compensated for their marketplace value. I mean, we just can't assume zero labor costs. We do for ourselves sometimes out of necessity, but that's not the case if you're hiring somebody to help you make the hay.
Right. Yeah. And, the guy I bought hay from 2 weeks ago had the exact same comment. He's like, yeah, it's been pretty tough lately. It's hard to find the help that's willing to work. And I was like, no, it's hard to find the help that's willing to work for nothing.
Right.
because there are so many good, easy jobs now for teenagers. It's almost insane what teenagers can make if they don't look at their phone and get work done.
Right.
It's almost, there are so many small businesses that just love to have those kids that
right.
just get stuff done.
Yep.
So, you've got to compensate for it. You've got to compensate them for their time and for their effort, because otherwise they're just going to go find somewhere else to make money.
Number 8, oversupply of hay. The past 2 years have brought good spring rains and good yielding hay crops. This, coupled with a record low number of cattle, means hay is cheaper than usual.
Yeah.
You can go out and buy it, and it's very inexpensive. Now, that's not always the case. And this is actually one of the points of contention in some of those Facebook comments, right? We don't always have an oversupply of hay.
Yeah, exactly. And some of the guys that I see doing this where they've completely given up the haymaking part of their operation, the things that they are doing really well is they're purchasing hay well. They'll see an opportunity like this spring where someone has a whole barn full, and hay under a roof in Missouri is a valuable thing. They'll have a whole barn full of last year's hay that didn't get sold, and they're selling it for cheap, $10, $20 a roll just to get it out of their barn to make room for more hay. A lot of these guys see those opportunities. The guys that, if you're purchasing the hay, oftentimes you'll see these opportunities easier, and you can go and purchase that hay, put it in your own barn, and feed it this winter and very cheaply. Also, during a drought, usually during the middle of the summer, hay prices usually stay pretty level until fall time comes and people start running out of grass. You've got to get ahead of that curve. And if you're purchasing all your hay, usually you understand this, that hay is cheapest during June, July, and August. Maybe mostly June and July. Make your purchase then when hay prices are lowest, and avoid doing that during and purchase a few extra bales just in case, right? Instead of making that purchase in February when you run out of hay and hay prices are the highest.
The other thing is to do the math on the carrying cost of the inventory. If you go to Montana, there's lots of places around that have 2 years worth of hay inventory on hand, because the droughts happen there more frequently, and it's a different type of drought, right? They truly have years without pasture or years without hay. Maybe not completely without, but pretty darn close. So part of their business model is carrying 2 years worth of hay inventory to make sure that they don't have to buy hyper expensive hay during a bad drought. And 2 years is a rough number, right? But there is a time value of money component to that. If you're borrowing that money, you have to consider the interest expense, or what else could you do with that money that might bring a bigger return than having the hay sit?
Right.
Clearly in Montana, the math says we need to carry a little extra inventory.
Yeah, and so let's talk about drought for just a moment while we're on the subject of supply and drought and stuff. During a drought, hay yields are typically lower.
Yep.
Which means that you are spending more money. If you're making hay, you're still spending more money per ton of hay because you're making less of it. You're
spreading your fixed cost across fewer tons of hay. Things like insurance, if you're cash renting ground, that fertilizer that you put down, it doesn't matter whether you like
equipment costs,
all of these things are fixed costs that are spread across however many tons you produce.
Yeah. If you're making hay, and this will vary a little bit, but you're looking at just to harvest the hay with equipment costs and labor and fuel and depreciation, all of that stuff. You're looking at between $50 and $70 per acre just to make a bale, not counting the land costs and all of that stuff.
Yep.
It doesn't matter whether you make half a ton of hay per acre or 5 tons per acre.
Yep.
That cost is fairly fixed. So when you're in a drought, it's costing you more money to make that ton of hay than it would during a dry year. So even though you're making it, it's not, let's say it may not necessarily be saving you money.
Yep.
Might want to put a calculator to it. Plus, during that time, pasture is more valuable. You could be cash renting your pasture or running your own cattle on that pasture, stretch out your grazed forage resource. Yeah. That's something certainly to consider, drought management plans, all of that. And then another thing is planning to destock during a drought. And this is one thing that can get very emotional with people because we work really hard on our genetic base. This is an excellent time to get rid of number 81 because she's just, last year she kicked your son and she may make a calf every year, but this is a great time to get rid of her. And if you have a finger on the pulse of your operation and you know that your forage resource is on a downward trend when you're on the cusp of a drought, prices on cattle haven't gone down regionally for that drought yet, usually. And so if you're paying attention to where things are going, you can usually do your destocking earlier than others and get ahead of that, and you can maintain your forage resource. That's a good way to save yourself from the expense of feeding a lot of hay during the wintertime, because that's what it comes down to. You graze till your pastures run out, and then you have more months of feeding hay. And that can be expensive. I was just looking at the cow-calf budget for Missouri, and it's insane to me, but they are, the cow-calf budget is saying that net profits are around negative $7 a head, which is insane to me. But they had this line item under that said return to land and labor, and it was like $140, $150. Okay, well, that's where people are making their cash. That's where the cash flow is coming from. But if you add in a drought on top of that and you have to feed extra hay, you're no longer profitable. There's a point in there where and you need to do these numbers and understand at what point are you no longer profitable for the amount of hay that you have to feed, and then adjust your stocking rate accordingly so that you can make money. And use that cash, put that cash somewhere else.
The economist would say, calculate your break-evens, know your break-evens, and this is also a partial budgeting exercise. If I keep this many cows and I have to feed this much hay, I make this much money. If I keep fewer cows and I feed less hay, how much money do I make? Which number is bigger, right?
Right. Yeah, that's where you need to get to, especially in a drought year. And if you're prepared, you understand these numbers beforehand, your carrying capacity, then you can do this fairly easily, and it's far less painful, doing it that way. So.
Krone Carbon teders and rakes are specially designed for one goal, making the cleanest green hay without causing damage to your field or crop. It's all in the tine design, which gently lift and move your crop while flotation tires lessen compaction. Krone offers the largest selection of models and range of sizes in the world, so you get what works best for your operation. Find your local Krone dealer at krone-northamerica.com.
Now we're going to go on to number 9, where we might have some fighting words coming on this one.
Okay.
Soil degradation. Next to tillage, haying is the easiest way to degrade the soil. Carbon is an essential part of soil function, so removing all the above ground carbon sends the soil in a downward spiral. Fertilizers can help, but they cannot replace the benefits of returning some of the biomass back to the soil. That's a very carbon-centric comment. And I don't know about haying degrading the soil that much. I would actually argue that alfalfa is an excellent, like one of the best crops to grow for soil health. But you're not talking about alfalfa. You're talking about fescue hays.
Yeah, I'm talking mainly about fescue hay, and there's some truth to each of these. I didn't mention compaction in here, but I probably should have, because hayland seems to be the most compacted of any type of.
That's actually 100% true. Yes,
that's part in soil degradation. Carbon, I don't think of carbon as, I guess, the same way that what would you call them?
Somebody deeply concerned about climate change.
Climate activist would think about carbon.
Sure.
I think that as we have bugs in the soil that need carbon, because carbon is their energy source, essentially.
Yep.
They need carbon to function, and they're the ones that will help form aggregates, and they'll convert that carbon into a stable form that can be used to help in water retention and infiltration, all of that stuff. That's what I'm trying to get at with that point.
This is akin to a composting concept, right?
Yeah.
Where you need a particular a ratio of carbon to nitrogen for those composting bacteria to do their job. Now, we're not talking about high temperature thermophilic bacteria like you find in compost piles, but we're just talking about the everyday soil temperature bacteria doing their thing.
Yeah. Yeah, very similar, and they'll take that thatch layer, whatever's on the soil surface, and they can, I guess, process that in a way, helps the soil become better able to infiltrate water. To me, that's the biggest one. I get hung up on some of the other ones, but to me, the ability for a soil to infiltrate water is soil health in and of itself. Or I guess if you're in a stand, I'm talking Missouri here. If you're in sandy soil, the ability to hold the water is the most essential part of soil health. So those two, hold water, infiltrate water, those are the two that you really should be working towards as far as your soil health goals.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I'll back down. You were going to say something about alfalfa, though.
Yeah, alfalfa is an interesting one because what happens with alfalfa is that the carbon to nitrogen ratio is so high that carbon is used almost immediately by the soil microbes. You're probably improving your carbon numbers. And there's some research that goes along with this, that you're improving your carbon numbers through making alfalfa than you would, especially a crop like soybeans or corn. But you're also having these other issues that come along with making hay, like
the 17 passes a year that it takes to do 3 cuttings of alfalfa.
Yeah, exactly that. And on a more humid, in a more humid climate like this, where we're making those passes when our soil is near saturation, right, we can really damage a soil pretty easily. Absolutely.
That is one benefit to having absolutely zero rain. Compaction essentially goes away.
Yeah.
Yeah. The last point number 10, cheap winter feeding strategies. Viable alternatives like milo grazing and stockpiling fescue reduce winter feeding costs by more than half. Reducing hay sounds great, but you can't starve weight into a cow. That's the counter to this to this concept, right? The sentiment is true, says Roberts, so why would you insist on feeding hay when stockpiled milo or tall fescue is often good or better in forage quality than the average bale of fescue? Furthermore, these stockpile forages can be produced for a fraction of the price. You're taking all the harvest costs, all the mechanical harvest costs out, and looking at somebody that put up terrible quality hay and comparing that terrible quality hay to standing fescue or milo.
Yeah. I grew up in Idaho, and I learned what good quality hay is from the times on the dairy and all that work with the horse people. Moving to Missouri has been a real shocker to me because of the amount of poor quality hay that people are willing to produce. It's just insane. A couple years ago during the drought, my dad was buying good quality alfalfa hay in Idaho for the same price that I was buying junk fescue hay for in Missouri. And so it's really a burr under my saddle, as a forage agronomist to be dealing with this people that aren't really paying attention to forage quality. It's crazy to me. But anyway, there's forage producers in the state or beef producers in the state that are grazing standing milo, and they're putting weight on their fall calving beef cows during the wintertime. That's a pretty tough thing to do if you're feeding hay, and you can do it on standing milo pretty easily. Another thing, that stockpiled fescue is pretty darn high in quality, especially if you're stockpiling it late in the year. The later in the year you begin your stockpile, the higher in quality it will be.
What kind of quality are you seeing in that stockpiled fescue?
Yeah, so it can get up to and for fescue this is all relative, but for fescue you're looking at 10 to 12% crude protein, and maybe 55% TDN. So
completely adequate for a beef cow.
Oh yeah, and this is why fall calving in Missouri is so common, is because we can produce a very high quality forage in the fall time that we can graze cattle on through the winter. They can have a calf go through peak lactation and breed on that forage base. That's not something that you can do everywhere, but it is a unfair advantage, you could say, in the fescue belt that we have, that we can, that tall fescue is just so good during the fall time. But, there are those other options. If you're in corn country, take advantage of corn stalks. And then, if you go further west, you're getting into the short grass prairies, and, even further west into Wyoming and stuff, and Wyoming and Idaho and all of that. This stockpile concept looks just a little different because the forage quality isn't the greatest. And so what has to happen then, it's almost always cheaper to supplement protein than it is to supplement energy. Usually when we're producing hay and feeding it during the winter, we're trying to feed energy, and the protein just comes along. It's just along for the ride in the hay. But protein is almost always cheaper to supplement. And so I knew a couple farmers in Idaho that were, or ranchers, you would call them ranchers, out there that didn't feed any hay all winter long, which is crazy to me. But those cattle were bouncing across the state. They were going. There was a sheep rancher that I knew that he was grazing his sheep, high mountain meadows during the spring and summer. And then they were on alfalfa fields in the fall. And then they were out in the desert somewhere. He sent his to a place near the craters of the moon in Idaho. And they were out grazing brown grass during the wintertime.
But they had bred up on the alfalfa pastures in the fall.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So they had completely adequate protein levels and energy levels while they were trying to get those used to cycle and get bred up. And then he supplemented protein on those ranges, on the winter range.
Yeah. And there's some of those, and you really just have to, test your stockpile, see where it is, and supplement accordingly, because sometimes you can get into some pretty decent stockpile. Now, here's the other argument that I get. What happens when the snow is a foot tall, right? Because that's another issue. We get into deeper snow.
I'm gonna say that I've ridden snowmobiles over fences and not known that they were there. So in places, let's talk about places where the snow is chest deep, not just a foot deep. Let's reduce that ambiguity there to where, oh yeah, the cows will dig through the snow and get what they need.
Yeah, and so there's some things you have to be aware of. A cow isn't going to dig through the snow for 2 to 3 inches of growth. If you don't have something that is thick and maybe a foot tall under the snow, they're not going to go after it. There's nothing there for them.
Mm-hmm. Or it takes more work to get to that limited forage supply.
Yeah, exactly. So then you can start playing with some other options, and swath grazing is a pretty good one, where you just make these big windrows, swath your hay in late fall, make these nice big windrows so that your animals can get at it during the wintertime. And I know of some ranchers in Wyoming that'll do this, in western Wyoming, where they're grazing their animals through the winter on swath grazed pastures, but they throw a few horses in there with them, and those horses will dig through the snow and open up that crusted snow for the cows, and then the cows can go after all the swaths. There are some options there, if you're in deeper snow. In Missouri, we rarely have that issue. If you have good stockpile, you can usually get through it, and the cows will willingly go after it because the quality is usually good enough that they'd rather it over hay anyways. But you have to have enough down there for them to get at.
Do you know producers actively using these strategies?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. 6 names of producers here in Missouri that do this and that are very profitable. They've realized that they're best as cow producers. They get really good at that.
I started to think about this, and I can count on, certainly one hand and maybe two, the number of cow-calf producers in Northeast Washington that I know that don't make their own hay.
Yeah.
And again, back to the 3 feet of snow, they have to have some hay. But they're considering all of the other points that we just talked about. They're not necessarily swath grazing, bale grazing. They're not stockpiling. They're going out and buying feed. But they have a mixer too, which is something that we hadn't talked about, is the ability to control your ration when you're buying your feed. You can intentionally go out and buy bluegrass straws. Most of the bluegrass seed for lawns is grown here in the Northwest, right? That straw is just fiber. And it's fairly digestible fiber. Like, it's shockingly digestible in the world of straw. And then the producer goes out and buys the protein that they need to mix with it to get the ration that they want for their cows. And it works. This isn't just a Missouri concept.
Right. Take advantage of those cheap feedstuffs if you have them available to you.
And do the least cost ration exercise too. Because the making hay is not necessarily the least cost ration.
Right. Yeah, for sure. All of this food for thought. I know a lot of hay producers are listening to this podcast. Now you have some ammunition to go at your neighbor and be like, hey, buddy, let's partner together. Both benefit from this opportunity. It really is what it is. This opportunity that you have the equipment, they have the know-how of how to make beef.
Let's also make sure that those feedlots get cleaned out onto hay fields.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Actually, that's a really common Idaho thing, where the truck hauls hay into the dairy and then puts the side racks up on the flatbed and hauls manure back to the farm.
Right. There's some opportunity there as well. So, and manure is a big issue on some of these, especially in a feedlot. Manure is a liability. It's not a asset to them.
Right.
And so sometimes you can come at them with a solution to their liability, and you'd probably be surprised at what they're willing to do.
You just got to ask, and you got to think about the nutrient value. We're really just selling nutrients and time and labor Hay is just the medium.
Yeah, and if you're haying, I can't think of a better amendment than manure for your hay field.
So long as you're patient enough, right?
Yeah.
The nutrients you get from manure are not all instantly available, like from a shot of urea, right? Especially on the nitrogen side, that it's basically a slow release fertilizer, which is actually to your benefit. If you think about it, apply some manure in the fall for your spring hay crop. Great practice. Yep, absolutely. So, well, we've beat this to death. You're not evil. You're not dumb. You do participate in agriculture. We can set most of these Facebook comments aside and say, there's a lot to this, and it isn't just as simple as you have cows, you shouldn't make hay, or all hay is like stop making hay, period. That's not what you were trying to say with all of this. I'm glad we're able to have this discussion and have a good, thoughtful approach at it.
Yeah. Glad to be on the podcast with you, and thanks for bringing me on. I'm a lot of food for thought, really.
Again, I've been joined by Dr. Carson Roberts, an assistant professor and state extension specialist for forage and agronomy at the University of Missouri. Thank you to Krone for sponsoring the podcast. Shout out to Nick at Palmieri Sound for all of his audio wizardry that makes this sound so good. And thank you to Jessica Palmieri for our social media coordination.